Hi guys, and welcome to this week's edition of Listed. I'm your host Champagne Charlie, and this week we'll be going through the top 10 most morally offensive gimmicks. Number 10, the artist formerly known as Goldust. Most people know Goldust as one of the most outrageous and most entertaining characters in the history of the WWE. I'm not saying that the whole gimmick itself is offensive, but during the late part of the Attitude Era, there was a part of it which went way over the top. This was when Goldust started going as the artist formerly known as Goldust. Now, Dustin Rhodes at the time was getting it in the neck from fans and homophobes alike at the time for the gimmick itself. Things got far worse, though, when he started doing the artist formerly known as Goldust. Goldust, on many occasions, would walk to the ring wearing the most bizarre of attires, including things such as women's underwear, a ball gag, and even a Madonna bra at one point. He was basically trying to portray the homosexuality as freakish as he possibly could. And to his credit, he was just doing his job. But many people, also from the LGBT community, were outraged by it. Goldust eventually killed the gimmick as he went over to WCW to do also a very dodgy gimmick in Seven, but that only lasted one night before he became Dustin Rhodes. Goldust would eventually return in 2002 as the original incarnation. Number 9, Cohen White. Most of you are probably listening to this and thinking, who? Because that's how quickly it all went. But in 2005, WWE had the idea of having Chavo Guerrero denounce his Mexican heritage and become an Anglo-Saxon American male, basically saying, if it's not white, it's not right. They had turned one of the greatest Mexican wrestlers of his time into a white supremacist. It was one of the most stupidest things and most offensive things that I had ever seen at that time, even going so far as throwing racial slurs towards Shelton Benjamin, which culminated in a feud at Unforgiven 2005. Chavo Guerrero wanted to do his best to try and get this gimmick over as he could, even going so far as actually pitching the idea of wearing a KKK clan hood. Sadly, it took a tragedy for this gimmick to end. With Eddie Guerrero dying in 2005, the decision was made for Chavo Guerrero to immediately drop the Cohen White gimmick and go back to honoring his Mexican heritage and his uncle by simply being Chavo Guerrero. Number 8, Gene Snitsky. Now, on paper, Gene Snitsky seems as the ideal character to have on WWE. Pushing 7 feet tall and weighing well over 300 pounds, he was the ideal foil on Raw at the time to take on Kane. The only problem was the storyline and gimmick that came along with it. At the time, Kane was in a on-screen romance with Lita, and Lita was meant to be carrying Kane's child. What does Gene Snitsky do? He is the one who causes the miscarriage of said child, creating the slogan that would go with him for the rest of his career, "That wasn't my fault." It was just, ugh, that is the only thing I can use to describe it, even going so far as punting a baby doll on an episode of Raw. Gene Snitsky has since left the wrestling industry, but I wouldn't be surprised if that's the thing that follows him around everywhere he goes these days. Number 7, Alcoholic Hawk. Hawk from the Legion of Doom, one half of one of the greatest tag teams of all time. They had won tag team gold in NWA, AWA, WCW, WWE, and Japan. During their LOD 2000 gimmick in 1998, a decision was made backstage by creative to make Hawk act out real life on screen. Michael Headstrong, aka Hawk, had been having difficulties with alcohol and drugs for years, so they decided to exploit this on national television by having Hawk acting drunk or acting high during his matches, causing a rift between Animal Hawk and new member at the time, Droz, aka Puke. This culminated in Hawk at one point threatening to jump off the top of the Titantron and then being pushed off by Droz. The whole thing was in absolute bad taste, and LOD left WWE shortly afterwards. However, they were able to make peace with the WWE in 2003 when they appeared for one final appearance as a full team, Animal and Hawk, on an episode of Raw. Number 6, Beaver Cleavage. Weird name, I know, but it gets even weirder. Beaver Cleavage, formerly known as Mosh from the Headbangers, they decided to have this thing of this geeky guy, Beaver Cleavage, being tended to by his mother, played by a woman by the name of Mary Ann. Oh, it gets deeper. Watch out, Sigmund Freud, you're going to love this one. The idea was an incestuous storyline. Beaver Cleavage checking out his quote-unquote hot mother. These segments that they would do on Monday Night Raw thankfully only lasted a couple of weeks before someone in creative came to their senses and dropped the entire thing. Beaver Cleavage would go on to become Mosh once more in the Headbangers, and then forming a short-lived tag team with D'Lo Brown, which went nowhere. Sometimes in situations like this, you wonder what could have been, but in this situation, I am actually glad that we didn't. Number 5, the Mexicals. Back in 2005, after the emergence of ECW for what ECW One Night Stand, along came Psychosis, Super Crazy, and Hoover 2 Guerrera. These men were 3 of the original people from Lucha Libre who brought Lucha Libre to America in the mid-90s. So you'd think, what a great signing for WWE, and we're going to see some great matches with the likes of Rey Mysterio and everyone else who was on the Cruiserweight division at that point. Only 50% true. What we got were 3 of the greatest luchadors dressed as bloody gardeners. WWE masters of sensitivity. Because they were Mexican, they had to look like they were doing cheap labor. They came to the ring on diesel-fueled lawnmowers. As great as they were as a team, it was just the gimmick they were lumbered with that made it offensive. The Mexicals sadly didn't last that long in the WWE though, after Hoover 2 Guerrero was released in December of 2005 due to backstage problems. Psychosis would soon be on the chopping block afterwards, followed by Super Crazy a couple of years later. Number 4, Virgil. If you thought the last one was bad, get ready for this one. Virgil is basically the undisputed sign of how racing the wrestling business can be. You get a great African-American athlete such as Virgil. What do? You make him a manservant to the $1 Million Man. There's not really much to say on this one, apart from him playing manservant for most of his career. Number 3, Oklahoma. When you think things can't get bad in the wrestling business in the 90s at the time, you look up this gimmick. You take someone who's as great as the announcer Jim Ross, and someone has the idea of, I know what I'll do, I'll mock Jim Ross on national television. And who is this human piece of scum, do you ask? Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Ed Ferrara. Ed Ferrara, who was one of the people in charge of WCW at the time, thought it would be a great idea to dress up in a cowboy hat and black shirt and basically make fun of Jim Ross's Bell's palsy. Ed Ferrara actually thought he could pull this off and do a good impersonation. The only impersonation Ed Ferrara can do is of a man with no talent. And fortunately, Ed Ferrara was eventually shown the door at WCW, and it's one of the reasons why Jim Cornette eventually spat in his face later on down the line. Number 2, Kaientai. Most people remember Kaientai for being evil and saying indeed. But the thing that escapes most people's memory is the fact that Kaientai was originally a full faction of Japanese wrestlers, managed by a man by the name of Yamaguchi. The storyline at the time was Yamaguchi's wife had slept with Val Venus, the infamous porn star character of the WWE at that time. And how do Kaientai get their revenge on Val Venus at this point? They handcuff him to the ceiling, pull down his pants, and with a samurai sword, yelling at the top of their voice, choppy, choppy, peepee. As if the gimmick itself was bad enough, they go so far as using actions like that. Kaientai eventually watered themselves down into a very entertaining tag team with just Taka Michinoku and Funaki. But with the indeed and the evil thing attached to it, it was still mildly offensive. And finally, number 1. Number 1, Muhammad Hassan. All fair to wrestler Mark Capani, who played the role, he was just trying to do a job, and it was actually a very successful gimmick, going on an undefeated streak that lasted nearly 6 months. The only problem itself was the timing of the gimmick. On an episode of SmackDown in 2005, whilst Muhammad Hassan was in a feud with The Undertaker, there was a segment that took place where a group of men in balaclavas attacked The Undertaker in the ring. The only problem being was this episode was aired on the same day as the July 7th London bombings. Since then, Mark Capani has become a world history teacher and has turned his back on the history of pro wrestling. But you have to wonder, what could have been if they had never aired that segment on television? That, ladies and gentlemen, was the top 10 most morally offensive gimmicks. Please like, share, and subscribe, and keep on watching Talking Crap and DKW Demolition.